Welcome to Mindful with Minaa, where we explore how mindfulness can enhance your relationships and well-being. I'm your host, Minaa B, a licensed social worker, mental health educator, and author. Through insightful discussions, I will guide you towards self-awareness and self-efficacy, empowering you to effectively manage your relationships, reduce burnout, and be more present with yourself. So let's jump into today's episode. What's up, mindful community? Today I want to talk to you about therapy. I am a licensed social worker and a former therapist, and I think it's time to dive into the conversation of what is therapy? How can we maximize therapy? How can we utilize therapy as a way to enhance our well-being and meet our emotional goals, but also does everybody need therapy? So I kind of want to answer some questions that come up often when it comes to exploring the concept of improving your well-being, attaining personal growth, and just really demystifying different things that happen in the therapeutic space. So to start off, I think it's important to unpack what therapy is. Therapy is simply a space to improve your mental health, enhance your well-being, and help you achieve your personal goals. In the therapeutic environment, the goal is to help you improve your mental health by understanding your history, understanding the things that happen to you in life, how those experiences shaped who you are, how those experiences may have rewired your brain as well as your nervous system. And your therapist is there to provide a safe and confidential space to help you heal, explore your thoughts, your feelings, and experiences, but most importantly, employ you with various techniques and approaches to help you gain insight into your problems, develop coping skills to manage your problems, and most importantly, provide you with tools and resources to help you live the life you believe you deserve. And so, when it comes to working with a therapist, you're generally going to work with someone who is a trained professional. There are various industries that support therapy. And so you could work with a psychologist, you could work with a psychiatrist. I personally am trained as a social worker, but I was trained on the clinical track. And so I'm an LMSW. You can also work with an LCSW, but we have the training and the skills and the expertise to provide therapy. And so why is therapy efficient? Well, if you were to break your toe or if you were to break your wrist, are you going to call your friend and say, hey, like my wrist is broken. Can you come over and help me heal? Probably not. If you find out you have some sort of disease, are you going to call your friend and say, hey, can you come over and perform surgery or provide me with the treatment that I need? You're absolutely not going to do that. Anytime we have a physical injury, we understand the importance of working with a professional within the healthcare system to treat those physical injuries. And so it is literally the same concept when it comes to your emotional well-being. On an emotional level, you might find yourself feeling really anxious. You might find yourself feeling really depressed. You may have experienced different forms of trauma. And I want to break down trauma really quickly so that you can understand how trauma can impact your life. So we like to see trauma through 3 different types of lenses. The first is acute trauma, where you experience an isolated incident, but it impacts your nervous system, and therefore it can lead to PTSD. And so to give you an example of an isolated incident, let's think about the 9/11 terrorist attacks. It is not something that happened every single year. We honor September 11th, and we honor that day because we recognize the weight of what happened on that day and how that left both physical injuries as well as emotional wounds. And people are still healing from the 9/11 terrorist attacks even till this day. And so that is a form of acute trauma. But then you have chronic and complex trauma. Chronic trauma is when you experience a traumatic event for a long period of time, where complex trauma is when you experience multiple forms of trauma over a long period of time. And so growing up in a home where, for example, you experienced poverty, you're not poor for one day. You're not poor for 1 week. Generally, this is an ongoing issue. And so you may have grew up witnessing your parents struggle to make ends meet, maybe struggle to put food on the table most of your childhood. And this is why you have a scarcity mindset. This is why you have a difficult relationship to money. This is also why you probably have a difficult relationship to productivity, because you believe you need to overwork yourself because you're concerned that if you don't, you may not have food on the table. And those things can impact your nervous system, which is why, even if it happened in your childhood, if you didn't get the treatment that you need to manage the trauma, science shows that unhealed trauma can have a long lasting impact up to 20 to 30 years later, which is why you have people who are 25, 35, 45 still throwing tantrums or still behaving in certain childlike behaviors when they're angry, frustrated, or sad. And that is because their nervous system is dysregulated. And it's very typical for an adult to regress back to their childhood tactics to manage the way they're so overwhelmed with fear or worry, or maybe experiencing panic or experiencing understimulation and freezing. Sometimes we will utilize the techniques we used as kids to manage the discomfort we're feeling in our bodies as adults. And so, as I sit here and unpack all of this, imagine having hardship, imagine reflecting on the traumas you've experienced and expecting your best friend to know how to help you get through all of this. It's not realistic. The same way, if you found out you had a terminal illness or, like I said earlier, you broke your wrist, you're not going to expect your friend to come over with their medical kit and know what to do with you when they have no medical training. And so this is why working with a therapist can play a role in optimizing your mental health, because a therapist is trained to help you manage your emotional and psychological well-being. A therapist will be trained in certain modalities to provide you with tips and techniques to manage the symptoms that you have, but they're also trained to be able to have valuable insight where, as they're listening to you unpack your problems, they can say, you know what, it sounds like this might be connected to something you experienced when you were a kid. Or maybe let's dive deeper into what I'm hearing, because when you talk to me about this issue, I feel like there's a missing piece to the puzzle. You know, they're trained to be able to listen and provide you with a psychologically safe space, a non-judgmental space, a space where you can feel seen and heard, but you're also going to be challenged in that relationship because the goal is to help you progress and move forward. The goal is to help you overcome the things that you experienced. The goal is to help you manage your trauma. So it's going to make sense that there are going to be times where therapy is uncomfortable. There's going to be times where it feels as if your therapist might be challenging you around certain things, because that is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take in what you're saying and say, you know what, I'm going to put this back on you. Help me understand what you're thinking, what you're feeling, because this is what I'm hearing. And based off what I'm hearing, I think this sounds like a thinking error. It sounds like you're making assumptions about a situation that you don't really have the facts about. It sounds like you're jumping to conclusions about a situation and you haven't done the work of communicating with this person to understand the situation better. It sounds like you're engaging in catastrophic thinking because this one incident happened and already you've already created about 15 different scenarios about all of these other things that could happen that actually did not happen. And so we're trained to be able to listen and say, that sounds like a cognitive distortion. Oh man, like that sounds like you're feeling anxiety. That actually sounds like high functioning depression. These are things your friends may not be able to pick up on when you're talking to them about your issues. And so when you're working with a therapist, I want you to feel okay with recognizing that the therapeutic relationship is a safe space, but it is also going to be an uncomfortable space. And one of the things that I really, really want you to hone in on is understanding that feeling discomfort is not synonymous with being unsafe. And this is important to dwell on because Too often, we feel fear, we feel anxiety, we feel all of these difficult emotions, and we start to shut down based off our trauma history and say, well, you know what? My therapist may not be the right fit for me because they challenged me on something, or I felt really uncomfortable after today's session. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're unsafe. It simply means you're feeling an emotion. You feel uncomfortable. And it makes sense that you're going to feel uncomfortable in a therapeutic room because you're coming into that space, bringing your trauma, bringing your pain, bringing your hurt. But the goal of you being in that space is to sort through all of that and figure out, how can I become the best version of myself? Now I want to unpack a question that I get all the time, which is, well, Mina, therapy is so expensive. And so to grow and heal and evolve, do I have to go to therapy? And as a former therapist myself, my straightforward answer is no. I do not think that everyone has to go to therapy, but I do believe everyone can benefit from trying therapy. I don't, however, feel like the only way that you can heal in life is if you see a therapist. What I truly believe about healing is that you need to develop mental fitness, and you have to develop a great level of self-responsibility to say, I am hurting and I want to heal, and I'm going to do the work to commit to healing. I'm going to do the work of figuring out what are the resources that I need to be a better version of myself. So I say all of this to say, no, you don't have to go to therapy to get the help and the support that you need. But what I need you to understand is you have to be willing to do something. Because at some point in your healing journey, you have to reflect and say, what I have been doing isn't working. And so if I'm not willing to do A, then I need to figure out what plan B is. If plan B doesn't work, I need to figure out what plan C is. Because that is how we develop resiliency, and that is how we develop mental strength. And so if you are considering finding a therapist, well, I want to provide you with some tips on how to make this journey feel comfortable for you, but also provide you with some insight on how to approach the therapeutic process. The first thing to understand is you are paying your therapist, therefore, you deserve quality care. And in our social media climate, I am hearing so many horror stories of therapists that present with so many red flags, being disrespectful to their clients, dumping their own problems and traumas in the therapeutic session, and the client feels like they have to now hold space for the therapist trying to become friends with the client, which is inappropriate. And so there are so many warning signs to look out for. But I want to start with what you should look for. The first thing is you want to look for someone who makes you feel safe and makes you feel comfortable. So generally, when you are searching for a therapist, you might go on psychologytoday.com, you might go on therapyforblackgirls.com or some other database or directory, and you can look at someone's profile picture, read their bio, do some internet research, look at their website, see if they have reviews, try to get to know this person before you reach out to them to make that initial consultation. And when you do make that initial consultation, remember that it is okay to ask questions, because during that consultation phase, the therapist is going to be asking you questions to make sure that you are a good fit for them. But you want to make sure that therapist is a good fit for you. So there are some things that you might want to bring up during that consultation phase, such as, this is the issue that I'm presenting with. Can you let me know if there are clients in the past that you've worked with who have the same issue? And what is your treatment approach? How would you work with me to help me manage this issue? What can I expect working with you? Help me understand the modality that you use. And if you don't know what that is, have them explain it to you. I see on your website you're trained in CBT. What is that? Can you help me unpack what that means and how it will benefit me? Can you help me understand what DBT is? I know that I am somebody who has experienced trauma, so can you give me insight into how you will work with me and the tools and the resources that you may be able to provide to help me thrive and reach my treatment goals? It is okay to ask the therapist those questions. Now, there's also a very, very important question that you want to ask, which is, can you tell me what your qualifications are as well as your credentials? So if you have a license, can I get a copy of your licensing number? Generally, you should see this on their website, especially if you find them on a certain database. But this is so important because, y'all, the amount of time I have seen people promoting therapy on social media, and when I go on their website, they are not trained therapists at all, but they are using the language they provide therapy. That is not appropriate. If you want to work with a life coach, that is completely fine. But understand that when you're working with a life coach, you're not working with a therapist. So the things that you want to go to therapy for, if you need to heal from trauma, if you have all of these things that you want therapeutic healing around, it is important to make sure that the person you're seeking help from has the credentials to provide you with the care that you need. A life coach is not the same as a therapist, and a life coaching session should not be marketed as a therapy session. And so I just want you to be equipped and prepared when you are doing that initial consultation phase. Not only are you asking that person questions, you want to know what are your qualifications? What is your area of expertise as well? Because you might have some therapists who specifically is trained in eating disorders, and they generally like to work with clients who struggle with eating disorders, and they may not be able to help you unpack racial trauma. You also want to work with a therapist who is trauma informed, especially if you feel like you have dealt with some form of trauma in your life, or you may not even know that you've dealt with a form of trauma in your life. And so having these questions in advance can be super, super helpful to help you just manage the idea of what does it feel like to be in therapy and what can I expect if I decide to work with you. Now, when it comes to the cost of therapy, here's a few tips. One, if you are insured, you can call up your insurance provider and ask them to connect you with therapists that are in network so that all you have to do is cover your copayment. There are times, however, where you can find a therapist who is out of network and you just want to call your insurance provider to ask, if I work with this therapist, what percentage of the out-of-pocket costs will you reimburse me? Because generally, if you work with a provider that is out of network, your insurance company may not pay for the full thing, but they might cover a portion of those sessions. You can also reach out to a therapist and ask them if they offer a sliding scale fee, which basically means that they will offer you a reduced therapeutic rate based off your salary. And so if you are low income, if you're unemployed, they might have scholarships or certain slots available where they will give you a discounted price. And another thing I want you to ask is, what are those sessions going to be like? Are they going to be in person? Are we going to have them virtually? Are they 45-minute sessions? Are they hour-long sessions? Because this varies therapist to therapist. I also need y'all to understand that community mental health operates in a completely different framework than working with a therapist in private practice. And so earlier I talked about my experience as a therapist in community mental health, where I was able to provide people in my community with free services. You may not get that from a therapist who is working in private practice, because you have to understand the therapist who is in private practice is a business owner. So they have rent to pay, they got to keep their lights on, they have staff to pay, and they have to pay themselves. Somebody who is working in community mental health, they're a salaried employee. So therefore, they're abiding by the guidelines of their organization. So you also have to use some level of discernment to recognize, I'm reaching out to all of these therapists who are in private practice. I can't afford them. I'm going to have to maybe pivot and reach out to some community clinics that's offering care. And it might take a little longer because they may have wait lists. I also may not be able to choose my therapist the way that I want to, because it's an organization and they're going to assign a staff member to you. So you have to recognize it's a completely different world, community mental health compared to private practice. But if you do want to work with a therapist, then you just have to weigh your options and figure out which approach is best for you based off your needs. And so I hope this episode was super helpful for you. Understand that you have a right to heal. And I want you to be able to make the right choice regarding the ways that you heal. And there are going to be times where you find that you need a therapist. And when you do meet with the therapist, you might find that it's beneficial to meet with them once a week. Then you might move on to meeting with them bi-weekly, or even once a month as time goes on. And then you can also graduate out of therapy. This is not something that you have to stick to for the rest of your life unless that is what you want. And if you know that right now you're listening to this and you're like, I hear everything you're saying, Mina, but like, I don't know, I just still struggle with the stigma of therapy, or I've done it before and it just didn't work out for me, and I don't know if I want to go back out there. It is okay to take your time with the process, but as I said earlier, it's okay if you make the choice not to work with the therapist, but you do have to make the choice to figure out what you need to heal. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please take a moment to rate and review this podcast on your preferred platform. Also, don't forget to share it with a friend and on social media. To stay connected with me and my work, follow me on social media and subscribe to the Mindful with Mina newsletter, which can be found on my website, www.minab.com. You can also continue learning from me by ordering my book, Owning Our Struggles, which is available at all major book retailers. Stay tuned for a new episode next week, and most importantly, remember to be present and stay mindful. Take care, and goodbye for now.